Millionaire finds baby on housekeeper's back. Cleaning the floor of his mansion, he falls in love at the sight. The morning sun penetrated through the enormous windows of the Thompson mansion, located in the heart of Beverly Hills, creating a spectacle of light on the Italian marble that covered the floor. Jack Thompson, at 45, observed his own image reflected in the window while adjusting his Italian silk tie. His brown eyes, always alert and determined, seemed heavier that morning. "Mr. Thompson, the meeting with the shareholders is confirmed." 4:10 a.m., announced Lisa, his personal assistant, through the intercom. Jack responded with a brief, "Got it," before turning his attention back to the landscape of the gardens below. It was another ordinary day in his meticulously organized life. As president of the Thompson Group, one of the largest holdings in the country, he was accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Power and control were his daily tools, and solitude his most faithful companion, although he would never admit that to himself. Descending the marble stairs towards the living room, something unusual caught his attention. Through the French doors that led to the back garden, he saw a scene that made him stop abruptly. A young woman was kneeling on the ground, cleaning the stones of the path that led to the main fountain. What intrigued him most wasn't just her presence. After all, the mansion had a large staff, but the small bundle tied to her back with a colorful fabric. A baby who couldn't have been more than a few months old. The woman worked diligently, always attentive to the baby, who occasionally moved on her back. Her black hair was tied in a simple bun, and even from a distance Jack could perceive the delicacy of her mixed-race features. There was something about the scene that deeply disturbed him. Perhaps the contrast between the simplicity of that mother and her child with the opulence of the surrounding environment. "Who is that new employee?" he asked Mrs. Johnson, the housekeeper who had been working for the family for over 2 decades. "That's Emily Davis, sir. She started this week. Very hard-working, poor thing. She had no one to leave her little one with, so I let her bring him. I promise it won't interfere with her work," replied the housekeeper, with an almost maternal tone. Jack made a dismissive gesture with his hand, indicating that he didn't mind the child's presence, but his mind was already restless. There was something about that woman's posture, in the way she protected her son while working, that awakened a long dormant curiosity in him. During the meeting with the shareholders, he found himself several times with his thoughts returning to that garden scene. Between analyses of spreadsheets and discussions about corporate mergers, the image of the young mother with her baby intruded into his thoughts like an insistent reminder of something he couldn't name. At the end of the day, when he was already in his private office on the top floor of the mansion, Jack did something that wasn't his custom. He called his private investigator, Mark Silver. "I need information about a new employee, Emily Davis. I want to know everything. Background, family, where she lived before, why she came to work here. Be discreet," he ordered, without giving further explanations. When he hung up the phone, he remained for a few moments observing the now empty garden through the window. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky in orange hues, and for the first time in a long time, Jack Thompson felt that something in his routine life was about to change. He couldn't explain why, but that simple garden scene had awakened feelings in him that he thought he no longer possessed. In her modest apartment on the outskirts of Los Angeles, Emily Davis was rocking her son Ethan to sleep, exhausted after another day of work. She had no idea that she had caught the attention of the powerful owner of the mansion, nor that her life was about to take a completely unexpected turn. As she hummed a lullaby, her thoughts wandered to the past she was trying to leave behind, unaware that her future was about to intertwine with that of one of the most powerful men in the country. The report on Emily Davis arrived in Jack Thompson's hands the following morning, much earlier than he expected. Mark Silver had always been efficient, but this time he had outdone himself. Sitting in his Italian leather armchair, Jack began to read the document with growing interest. Emily Davis, 28 years old, originally from Sacramento, California. With a degree in education, she had abandoned a promising career as a coordinator at a private school after a turbulent relationship with Daniel Evans, son of an important businessman in the hotel industry. The relationship had ended 8 months ago when she discovered a series of lies and manipulations by her ex-partner. Interesting, Jack murmured to himself, continuing to read. Emily had moved to Los Angeles pregnant, starting a new life practically from scratch. Besides working at the mansion, she gave private lessons in her spare time and did proofreading work for an online publisher. All the money was destined for her son's support and the rent payment for a small apartment in the south of the city. The sound of childish laughter interrupted his reading. From the office window, Jack observed Emily in the garden. It was her lunch break, and she was taking advantage of it to play with little Ethan, who was now sitting on a blanket spread out on the grass. The scene provoked a strange sensation in him, a mixture of admiration and something more that he couldn't define. "Excuse me, sir," Mrs. Johnson's voice sounded at the door. "Mr. Adam Carter is here to see you." Jack quickly put the report in the drawer. Adam, his childhood friend and trusted lawyer of the group, entered the room with his usual confident smile. "Jack, it's been a while. I came to personally bring the documents for the merger with the Asia Group," said Adam, but his eyes were drawn to the same garden scene that had previously held Jack's attention. "New employee?" "Yes," replied Jack, noticing an unusual interest in his friend's gaze. "Emily Davis. She started this week." "Emily Davis," repeated Adam, his face showing genuine surprise. "Emily Davis?" Jack raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You know her?" "We grew up together in Sacramento. Our families were neighbors," explained Adam, a nostalgic smile forming on his lips. "I haven't seen her in years since I moved to Los Angeles for college. She was always brilliant, you know, one of the best students in school." The revelation caused an inexplicable discomfort in Jack. The coincidence seemed too great to be just a work of chance. "Why don't you go say hello?" he suggested, trying to maintain a casual tone. Adam hesitated for a moment. "Maybe later. I really came to discuss the merger. There are some points we need to review." During the meeting that followed, Jack had difficulty concentrating. His thoughts alternated between the content of the report and the new information. About the connection between Emily and Adam, something in that story didn't fit completely. In the garden, oblivious to the conversation happening in the office, Emily was putting away Ethan's toys in her bag. Her lunch break was ending, and she needed to get back to work. As she arranged things, her eyes caught a movement in the top floor window. For a brief moment, her gaze crossed with Jack Thompson's, and she felt an inexplicable shiver run down her spine. That same afternoon, after her shift, Emily was waiting for the bus at the stop when an imported car pulled up beside her. The window lowered, revealing a face she hadn't seen in more than a decade. "Adam?" she asked, incredulous. "Long time no see, Emily," he responded with a warm smile. "We need to talk. There's a lot I need to tell you." Emily hesitated, hugging Ethan tightly to her chest. Her life had already been completely transformed once by trusting the wrong people. But Adam was different. He was a connection to a happy past before everything went wrong. After a moment of reflection, she accepted the ride. In the office, Jack observed the scene through the mansion's security cameras, a feeling of unease growing in his chest. There was something in Adam's look, in the way he smiled at Emily, that deeply bothered him. He picked up the phone and dialed Mark Silver again. "I need more information," he said as soon as the investigator answered. "About the relationship between Emily Davis and Adam Carter in Sacramento. And I also want to know more about this Daniel Evans. There's something in this story that doesn't seem right to me." The cafe in downtown Los Angeles was buzzing with the typical late afternoon movement. Emily observed the steam rising from her cup, while Adam played with Ethan, who laughed carefree in his lap. The scene might have seemed casual to any observer, but the words that followed completely changed the atmosphere. "Emily, you have no idea how much I tried to find you after you disappeared from Sacramento," Adam began, his eyes showing genuine concern. "When I heard about what Daniel had done—" "Please, Adam," Emily interrupted him, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't want to talk about that. It's in the past." "But that's exactly what we need to talk about," he insisted, leaning over the table. "Did you know that Daniel is suing several companies in the Thompson Group, and that he has privileged information that no one knows how he got?" Emily paled, her hands instinctively tightening around the coffee cup. "What are you trying to say?" "I don't believe in coincidences, Emily. You, working right in the Thompson mansion, just now that Daniel is moving his pieces against the group?" The noise of the city seemed to have diminished around them. Emily felt her heart racing, memories she had buried beginning to emerge. "I didn't know any of this, Adam. Mrs. Johnson, the housekeeper, is an aunt of a friend of mine. She was the one who recommended me for the job." Meanwhile, at the Thompson mansion, Jack was analyzing the new report he had just received. The information about Daniel Evans was disturbing. Emily's ex-partner wasn't just the spoiled son of a businessman. He was a calculating man who had built his fortune through privileged information and manipulation. His latest target was the Thompson Group, and he seemed to have access to data that only people in the company's innermost circle knew. "Lisa," Jack called through the intercom, "schedule a meeting with the board for first thing tomorrow. And try to locate Adam. Mr. Carter asked me to let you know that he's resolving personal matters this afternoon, sir," the assistant replied. Jack stood up, walking to the window. The sun was beginning to set, painting the Los Angeles sky with orange hues. His mind was working intensely, connecting dots that before seemed scattered. At the cafe, the conversation between Emily and Adam was taking an even more serious turn. "Emily, there's something you need to know," said Adam after a moment of hesitation. "Daniel isn't alone in this story. He has a partner, someone who knows the Thompson Group deeply." "Why are you telling me all this?" Emily questioned, her voice mixing confusion and fear. "Because..." Adam paused, carefully choosing his words. "Because I care about you. I always have. And because I know you might be in danger without even realizing it." At that moment, Emily's cell phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk about Ethan. I know you're in Los Angeles. You can't hide forever. Daniel." Her hands trembled so much, she almost dropped the phone. Adam, noticing her distress, held her hand across the table. "I won't let him get near you or Ethan, Emily, I promise." The gesture didn't go unnoticed by a man observing the scene from a distant table. Mark Silver, the investigator hired by Jack, was recording every detail of the interaction between the two. At the mansion, Jack was receiving a call that left him even more disturbed. It was from a former employee of the financial sector, dismissed 6 months ago. "Mr. Thompson, I know I shouldn't be calling, but there's something you need to know about Adam Carter." Meanwhile, Ethan, in Adam's lap, was playing carelessly with a pen, scribbling on a napkin. His eyes, so similar to the father Emily was trying to forget, sparkled with joy. The little one had no idea that his very existence was at the center of a much larger plot than anyone could imagine. Emily looked at her watch, realizing she needed to get home. As they said goodbye, Adam hugged her in a way that seemed to want to protect her from all the evil in the world. "I'm going to help you get through this, Emily. You can trust me." What she didn't know was that, at that exact moment, Jack Thompson was also receiving crucial information about her past, a revelation that would completely change the course of events. The lives of those three people were about to intertwine in a way that none of them could predict, and the secrets that each one kept were slowly coming to light. The meeting room of the Thompson Group was immersed in a tense silence. Jack, seated at the head of the table, observed the faces of the board members, while his financial director presented evidence of information leaks. The numbers projected on the screen told a disturbing story of betrayal and conspiracy. "As you can see, gentlemen," continued John, the financial director, "someone with privileged access to our operations has been providing strategic information to the rival group. The coincidences are too specific to be just luck." Jack maintained his impassive expression, but his mind was working intensely. Adam's absence at this crucial meeting did not go unnoticed. His friend had sent a message claiming to be in an important hearing, but Jack no longer knew what to believe. Meanwhile, in the mansion's garden, Emily worked diligently, trying to keep her thoughts away from yesterday's conversation with Adam and Daniel's threatening message. Ethan was sleeping peacefully in the stroller that Mrs. Johnson had gotten for her, a kindness that had moved her. "Emily," Jack's deep voice surprised her. It was the first time he had addressed her directly. "Could you accompany me to my office, please?" Her heart raced. During the short journey to the office, 1,000 thoughts crossed her mind. Had she done something wrong? Had they discovered about her past? Jack's office was exactly as she had imagined, imposing and elegant with a privileged view of the city. He indicated an armchair for her to sit in and, to her surprise, personally served 2 cups of coffee. "Miss Davis," he began. His voice controlled. "How much do you know about Adam Carter's work for the Thompson Group?" The question caught her off guard. "Just what everyone knows, sir, that he's the group's main lawyer." Jack observed her for a few moments, as if assessing the sincerity of her words. "And about Daniel Evans? What can you tell me about him?" Emily felt her blood freeze in her veins. How do you know about Daniel?" "I know more than you." "Imagine," Jack replied, picking up a folder on the desk. "I know he's Ethan's father. I know about the threats he's been making, and I also know that he and Adam have known each other longer than they appear to." The revelations hit Emily like a punch to the stomach. "I don't understand. Adam and Daniel know each other." "Not only do they know each other," Jack continued, showing some photographs. "They've been meeting regularly over the past few months, including last night, after Adam dropped you off at the bus stop." The photos showed Adam and Daniel in a discreet restaurant in Beverly Hills, clearly involved in a serious conversation. Emily felt her hands tremble as she recognized the man who had made her life hell. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, her voice barely coming out. "Because I believe that you, like me, are being used in a much bigger game," Jack replied, his tone softening for the first time. "Daniel isn't just after Ethan. He wants control of the Thompson Group, and apparently has found internal allies to help him." At that moment, a baby's cry echoed through the hallway. Ethan had woken up. Emily made a move to get up, but Jack stopped her with a gesture. "Mrs. Johnson is with him," he assured. "We need to finish this conversation. Emily, I need you to trust me. I know you have no reason to, but at this moment I'm probably the only person who can really help you." Their gazes met, and for the first time Emily saw beyond the figure of the powerful businessman. There was a sincerity in his eyes that disconcerted her. "Daniel discovered something in my research when we were working together," she finally revealed. "Something that could compromise several companies, including the Thompson Group. He threatened to use that information if I didn't go back to him." Jack leaned forward, interested. "What kind of information?" Before Emily could answer, they were interrupted by Lisa, who hurriedly entered the office. "Mr. Thompson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Carter is here, and he's not alone." Through the open door, Emily saw Adam in the hallway. Beside him, Daniel Evans smiled with a disturbing familiarity, as if this were his home. Panic began to take hold of her when she saw that Daniel was staring fixedly at the stroller where Ethan was sleeping, now under Mrs. Johnson's care. Jack noticed her distress and, in a surprising gesture, held her hand. "Don't worry," he whispered. "I won't let anything happen to you or Ethan." The unexpected touch sent an electric current through Emily's body. At that moment, something changed between them. Something changed between them, a connection that went beyond the circumstances that had brought them together. But there was no time to explore that feeling. The real battle was about to begin, and the masks were finally starting to fall. The atmosphere in the Thompson mansion was charged with tension. Jack rose from his chair with the calculated elegance of someone accustomed to corporate confrontations, subtly positioning himself between Emily and the door. His face showed no sign of surprise at the unexpected arrival of the visitors. "Adam, Daniel," he greeted with a curt nod. "To what do I owe the honor of this unscheduled visit?" Daniel Evans took a few steps forward, his artificial smile contrasting with the predatory gleam in his eyes. He was a man of striking presence, wearing an impeccable Italian suit that rivaled Jack's. "Thompson," he replied, completely ignoring Emily's presence. "I've come to make a proposal that might interest your group, something that would avoid unnecessary public embarrassment." Emily felt her entire body tense. She knew that tone of voice, that manipulative way Daniel had of conducting situations. It was these same traits that had deceived her years ago, when she still believed he could change. "Emily," Adam spoke up, his voice betraying a note of concern that now sounded false to her. "I didn't expect to find you here." "Liar," she replied, surprising everyone with the firmness in her voice. "You knew exactly where I was. It was you who orchestrated all of this, wasn't it?" Jack observed the interaction with growing interest, his suspicions confirming with each passing second. Discreetly, he pressed a button under his desk, a prearranged signal with his security team. "Let's be direct," Daniel intervened, his smile disappearing. "I have information that could destroy the Thompson Group's reputation. Information that Emily kindly provided me during our joint research." "I never gave you access to anything," Emily protested, taking a step forward. "You hacked my computer, stole my files while I was—" "Details," Daniel cut her off with a dismissive gesture. "The fact is that I have the information, and I also have rights to my son, whom you've been illegally keeping away from me." Jack chose this moment to intervene. "Interesting that you mention illegality, Evans, especially considering the dossier I have on your activities over the past few years." For the first time, Daniel's smile faltered. Adam, who until then had remained slightly apart, approached with a worried expression. "Jack, be reasonable," he tried to argue. "We can resolve this discreetly. A merger between the groups, perhaps? Daniel is willing to negotiate." "Negotiate?" Emily's voice trembled with indignation. "You're trying to use my son as a bargaining chip in a business negotiation?" The silence that followed was deafening. Jack moved closer to Emily, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed by anyone in the room. "I have a counter-proposal," Jack said, his voice calm but charged with authority. "Mark, please come in." The office door opened, revealing Jack's private investigator. In his hands was a thick folder that made Adam visibly pale. "I found some interesting information about your secret partnership," Jack continued, "including how you planned to use Emily from the beginning. Did you reconnect with her by chance, Adam, or was it all prepared, Daniel?" Emily felt her world spin. "What is he talking about, Adam?" "Emily, I can explain," Adam began, but was interrupted by Daniel. "Enough beating around the bush," Daniel vociferated, losing his composure. "Thompson, you have 24 hours to accept the merger or everything comes out. And as for you, Emily—" His eyes turned to the hallway where Ethan was still sleeping. "I suggest you rethink your choices as a mother." It was at this moment that something unexpected happened. Mrs. Johnson, who everyone thought was in the hallway with Ethan, entered the office with the baby in her arms, accompanied by a woman Emily immediately recognized, Olivia Evans, Daniel's mother. "That's enough." "Daniel!" Olivia's authoritative voice cut through the environment like a razor. "You're not going to use my grandson in this dirty game of yours." Daniel's face transformed into a mask of shock and anger. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Olivia stepped forward, her heels echoing on the marble floor. "Doing what I should have done a long time ago, stopping you from destroying more lives." She turned to Jack. "Mr. Thompson, I apologize for my son's conduct. I have documents here that might interest you, and the police." The atmosphere in the room changed drastically. Daniel, for the first time, seemed truly shaken. Adam took a step towards the door but was stopped by the security guard who had just entered. Emily, still processing everything that was happening, felt Jack's hand lightly touch her shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but loaded with meaning, a silent promise of protection that for the first time in a long time made her feel truly safe. The library of the Thompson mansion became an improvised refuge after the confrontation in the E office. Emily, seated in a red velvet armchair, cradled Ethan in her arms while Olivia Evans exposed all the truth she had discovered over the past few months. "Daniel has always been obsessed with power," Olivia explained, her voice carrying the weight of years of regret. "When he met Emily at the research company, he saw an opportunity to access privileged information about various corporations, including the Thompson Group." Jack, leaning against his massive oak desk, listened attentively to every word. His eyes occasionally drifted to Emily, noticing how she unconsciously hugged Ethan closer whenever Daniel's name was mentioned. "But why Adam?" Emily asked, still trying to understand the betrayal of her childhood friend. How did he get involved in all of this? Olivia sighed, reaching into her purse from which she pulled out more documents. Adam was in debt. He made some risky investments and lost a lot of money. Daniel offered help in exchange for inside information from the Thompson Group. When he discovered you were in Los Angeles, he saw the perfect opportunity to use his connection with you. And how did you discover all of this? Jack questioned, his voice maintaining a professional tone, although his clenched fists betrayed his irritation. I've been monitoring my son's activities for months, Olivia replied. After his father passed away, Daniel changed. He became bitter, obsessive. I started to notice strange movements, suspicious meetings. I hired private investigators. Emily suddenly stood up, walking to the window. The afternoon was beginning to fall over Los Angeles, and the first city lights were starting to twinkle in the distance. All this time, I thought I was rebuilding my life, but I was just another piece in their game. Jack approached her, stopping by her side. You did rebuild your life, Emily. You did it with your own strength. They tried to use that against you. Their gazes met, and for a moment the rest of the world seemed to disappear. Ethan, sensing Jack's proximity, stretched out his little arms towards him, letting out a cheerful gurgle that broke the tension of the moment. To everyone's surprise, Jack took the baby in his arms with a naturalness that no one expected from him. Ethan immediately grabbed his tie, eliciting the first genuine smile from the businessman that day. Emily, Olivia called softly, there's one more thing you need to know. About your research, the one Daniel stole. You were right. The irregularities you found in the companies you were investigating were real, including, she hesitated, looking at Jack, in the Thompson Group. Jack showed no surprise. I know, he said simply. That's why Daniel was so confident in his blackmail. But he didn't count on one thing. I've been working to correct these irregularities for months since I took over the group's presidency. Emily stared at him, confused. You knew? Please, after all this, I think you can call me Jack. He smiled slightly. And yes, I knew. My father, he wasn't exactly an ethical man in his business. When I took over, I found several inconsistencies. I've been working discreetly to regularize everything. That's why Daniel was in such a hurry, Olivia completed. He knew that soon he would have nothing left to use against the group. A contemplative silence fell over the library. Ethan had fallen asleep in Jack's arms, his little hand still firmly holding the silk tie. What happens now? Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jack looked at the baby in his arms, then at her. Now you decide, but I want you to know that you have my full support, whatever your choice. I can ensure that Daniel won't bother you anymore. And I'll personally guarantee that, Olivia added firmly. I've tolerated my son's misconduct for far too long. I have enough evidence of his illegal activities to keep him busy with lawyers for the next few years. Emily felt tears forming in her eyes, but for the first time in a long time they weren't tears of fear or sadness. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Jack, still with Ethan sleeping peacefully in his arms, took a step in her direction. His gaze conveyed something that words couldn't express, a silent promise of protection, but also something more, something that made Emily's heart beat faster. I think it's time we rewrote some stories, he said softly. Starting with your position here at the mansion, I think your talents are being wasted in the garden, don't you agree? A week had passed since the confrontation in the library. The Thompson mansion breathed a different atmosphere, as if the air had become lighter. Emily, now installed in her new office in the administrative sector of the Thompson Group, was organizing the final details of the project Jack had entrusted to her, a complete audit of the group's corporate practices, focusing on social responsibility. More coffee? Asked Lisa, Jack's assistant, entering the room with a welcoming smile. The same woman who had barely noticed her presence before now treated her with respect and admiration. Thank you, Lisa, Emily replied, returning the smile. In the reserved area of her office, Ethan played happily in a small playpen that Jack had ordered installed. The detail didn't go unnoticed by anyone. The powerful group president was clearly committed to ensuring the comfort of both. Emily? Jack's voice sounded at the door. He was particularly elegant that morning, in a navy blue suit that accentuated his eyes. "Could you accompany me to the meeting room? There are some people I'd like you to meet." On the way, she couldn't help but notice how Jack occasionally adjusted his pace to match hers, a subtle gesture that demonstrated a consideration that went beyond mere professional courtesy. Lisa promptly offered to stay with Ethan. The meeting room was occupied by several people, including Olivia Evans, who now acted as a special consultant to the group. Since the confrontation with Daniel, she had become an unexpected ally and a constant presence in Ethan's life, determined to be the grandmother her grandson deserved. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jack began, his voice conveying natural authority, "as you know, we are undergoing a significant restructuring in the group. Ms. Davis will be responsible for leading our new compliance and social responsibility division." Emily felt all eyes turn to her. Just a few days ago, she was kneeling in the garden, and now she was about to lead an entire division of the group. The irony didn't escape her. "But before we begin," Jack continued, "I have an important announcement to make." He paused, his eyes meeting Emily's. "After a thorough investigation, we discovered that the research developed by Ms. Davis at her former company was not only correct, but will also be fundamental to the changes we intend to implement." Olivia smiled discreetly, while the other executives exchanged surprised looks. Emily felt her heart race, not just from the professional recognition, but from the way Jack looked at her, with a mixture of admiration and something more that she still couldn't define. The meeting extended through the morning, with Emily presenting her proposals with a confidence that surprised even herself. When everyone started to leave, Jack asked her to stay. "Any plans for lunch?" he asked once. They were alone. "Actually, I had planned to have lunch with Ethan in the garden, I know," he completed, smiling. "I thought maybe we could have lunch together. The three of us. I know a great restaurant nearby with a wonderful kids area." The invitation caught her by surprise. It wasn't the first time. Jack had shown interest in spending time with her and Ethan outside of the professional environment, but there was something different this time, a growing intimacy that both scared and attracted her. "Jack, She hesitated, carefully choosing her words. "I don't know if it's appropriate. With everything that's happened, people might think that I fell in love with the bravest and most principled woman I've ever met," he completed, his voice soft but determined. "And that her son won my heart from the first smile. Let them. Think, Emily. For the first time in my life, I don't care what others will say." The silence that followed was charged with emotion. Through the window, they could see the garden where it all began. Ethan, who had just woken up from his morning nap, let out a joyful laugh upon seeing Jack through the glass door of the room. "He really likes you," Emily commented, observing how her son fidgeted in Lisa's arms, stretching his little arms towards them. "And I like him," Jack replied sincerely. "And you, Emily. More than I thought possible." At that moment, an employee hurriedly entered the room, interrupting the conversation. "Mr. Thompson, sorry to interrupt, but we've just received an important notification. Mr. Daniel Evans is trying to call a press conference." Jack's smile didn't falter. "Let him try. Olivia has already taken care of everything." He turned to Emily. "So will you have lunch with me? I promise it will just be lunch between friends." The word friends hung in the air, loaded with unspoken meanings. Emily looked at Ethan, at Jack, and then at her new office. In a few days, her life had changed completely. Maybe, she thought, it was time to allow herself one more change. The restaurant Jack had chosen was an oasis of tranquility amidst the bustle of downtown Los Angeles. From their discreet table on the mezzanine, Emily watched Ethan play in the children's area just below, always under the watchful eye of the nanny Jack had arranged to accompany them. "He seems happier," Jack commented, his gaze alternating affectionately between Ethan and Emily. "You do too," Emily smiled, absently playing with her glass of mineral water. "It's strange. 2 weeks ago I was desperate, afraid of losing my son, not knowing who to trust. Now?" "Now?" Jack encouraged, leaning slightly over the table. Now I find myself wondering if it's all too good to be true, she confessed, finally verbalizing the fear she had been harboring. The position in the group, the protection, you... Jack reached across the table, gently touching her fingers. The contact, though subtle, sent shivers throughout her body. None of this is charity, Emily. You earned your position on your own merit. As for me... He paused, carefully choosing his words. You and Ethan have brought something to my life that I didn't even know was missing. The moment was interrupted by Jack's cell phone. It was Olivia Evans. He answered, putting it on speakerphone out of consideration for Emily. Jack, Emily, Olivia's voice sounded firm. Daniel just tried to give that interview he threatened, but something interesting happened. When journalists started questioning him about his own business practices, he simply went off the air. Emily released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Jack gently squeezed her hand, which was still under his. Thank you, Olivia, Jack replied. Keep us informed. After hanging up, a comfortable silence settled between them. Down below, Ethan had found a new little friend, and the two were laughing as they shared colorful blocks. You know, Jack began, his gaze lost in the scene of the children playing. I always thought I had everything in life. Money, power, respect. But seeing Ethan play like that, so innocent, so happy, I realized how empty my life was. Emily felt her heart race. Jack, No, he gently interrupted her. Let me finish. When I first saw you in the garden with Ethan tied to your back, something changed inside me. It wasn't pity nor curiosity. It was as if I finally understood what was missing in my life. At that moment, Ethan let out a particularly loud laugh, drawing both their attention. He had built a tower with the colorful blocks and was proudly looking up, seeking his mother's approval. He's amazing, Jack commented, with genuine admiration. Did you know the other day he called me Uncle Jack? I nearly melted. Emily laughed, feeling tears form in the corner of her eyes. He's never been like this with anyone before, not even with... She stopped, not wanting to mention Daniel. Emily, Jack called her attention back, his voice soft but determined. I know it's still early, that you've been through a lot of trauma recently, but I want you to know that I'm not in a hurry. We can build this at your pace, at our pace. This? She asked, though her heart already knew the answer. A family, he replied simply, if you give us a chance. Before Emily could respond, Ethan came running up to them, holding a drawing he had made. In it, 3 stick figures, a big one, a medium one, and a small one, all holding hands. Look, Mommy. Me, you, and Uncle Jack, he exclaimed proudly, placing the drawing on the table. Emily felt the tears flow freely now. Jack stood up, picking Ethan up and sitting him between them. The boy immediately began to explain every detail of the drawing, pointing with his chubby little fingers. Family, Ethan murmured, pointing to the drawing, surprising both Emily and Jack with the new word. At that moment, watching her son interact so naturally with Jack, Emily felt something click in her heart. Maybe some new beginnings didn't need to be feared. Maybe some encounters were truly meant to happen. Jack's cell phone vibrated again, but this time he just looked at the screen and smiled. It seems Daniel has decided to take a long trip abroad. Olivia just informed me that he boarded a flight to London. Is it over? Emily asked, almost not believing it. Jack took her hand again, intertwining his fingers with hers. The nightmare is over. Now we can start our story. That is, if you want. Ethan, still between them, took each of their free hands and joined them on the table, smiling as if he perfectly understood what was happening. And maybe he did understand, with that unique wisdom that only children possess. 3 months had passed since that decisive lunch. The Thompson mansion, once a symbol of solitary power, now echoed with Ethan's laughter as he ran through the corridors. Emily had finally accepted Jack's invitation to move in, after much insistence from him, and surprisingly from Mrs. Johnson, who treated Ethan as if he were her own grandson. That Saturday morning, Emily watched from the balcony as Jack taught Ethan how to ride a bicycle in the garden. The scene was so natural, so genuine, that sometimes she found herself pinching her arm to make sure she wasn't dreaming. "He was born to be a father," commented Olivia, who had arrived silently and now joined her on the balcony. "I've never seen Jack so happy." Emily smiled, agreeing. Olivia's presence had become constant and comforting in their lives. After Daniel's departure to London, she had dedicated herself entirely to being the grandmother Ethan deserved, and a true friend to Emily. "How are the preparations for Monday's presentation going?" Olivia asked, changing the subject. Emily took a deep breath. In 2 days, she would present to the Thompson Group board the results of 3 months of intense work, a complete corporate restructuring program focused on social responsibility and ethical practices. "Everything's ready," she replied. "But I confess I'm nervous. It's not every day that one proposes a revolution in one of the country's largest companies." "Mommy, Mommy!" Ethan's excited voice interrupted the conversation. "Look, I'm riding by myself!" The two women turned their attention to the garden, where Ethan was proudly pedaling without training wheels, Jack running beside him with his hands close, ready to support him if necessary. "You're amazing, my love," Emily applauded, her heart overflowing with joy at seeing the interaction between the two. The moment was interrupted by Lisa's arrival, who seemed agitated. "Mrs. Emily, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's an important call for you. It's from your old research company." Emily frowned, intrigued. She hadn't had contact with her former colleagues since leaving the company. She followed Lisa to her office, now permanently decorated with Ethan's drawings. "Emily?" A familiar voice sounded on the other end of the line. It was Sarah, her former mentor at the research company. "We need to talk. It's about the investigations you were conducting before you left. We've discovered something big." Emily's heart raced. "Sarah, I thought this matter was closed." "It's not," Sarah replied with urgency in her voice. "Remember that pattern you identified in international transactions? It wasn't just the Thompson Group. There's something much bigger happening, and I believe Jack Thompson needs to know." Emily looked out the window, where Jack was now pushing Ethan on the swing. Her life had finally found balance, peace. Should she stir up this hornet's nest again? "Emily," Sarah called, "I know you've moved on, but this is bigger than all of us, and you're the only one who can connect all the dots." At that moment, Jack looked up, meeting her gaze through the window. Even from a distance, he seemed to sense her unease. With a gentle gesture, he asked Mrs. Johnson to stay with Ethan and began walking towards the house. "Sarah," Emily finally responded, "send me everything you have. I'll need a few hours to analyze it." After hanging up, she stared at the closed laptop on her desk. Inside were the files Sarah had just sent, potentially containing information that could shake their lives again. "Is everything okay?" Jack's voice sounded from the door. He was slightly out of breath from running with Ethan, and his eyes showed genuine concern. Emily hesitated for a moment, but then remembered all the times that fear of trusting had almost destroyed her life. "We need to talk," she finally said, "about the past, the present, and mainly about our future." Jack entered the office, gently closing the door behind him. He sat in the chair across from her, as he had done so many times in the past few months, always respecting her space, always by her side. "Remember when you told me we'd build this at our own pace?" she asked, opening the laptop. "I think it's time we faced another challenge, together." Jack reached across the desk, a gesture that had become so natural between them. "Together," he repeated firmly, "always." Outside, Ethan continued playing under the watchful eye of Mrs. Johnson and Olivia, oblivious to the twists of fate that still awaited his newly formed family. But now it was different. Now they were stronger, united, and most importantly, now they had each other. The main auditorium of the Thompson Group was packed on that historic Monday. Emily, elegant in her navy blue suit, observed the audience composed of executives, shareholders, and, to her surprise, representatives from several other major corporations in the country. "Ready?" Jack whispered, lightly touching her shoulder. He was especially imposing that day, emanating a confidence that she now knew was the result not just of power, but of the certainty of doing the right thing. Emily nodded, clutching the folder that contained not only her original presentation on corporate restructuring, but also the impressive discoveries that Sarah had shared. What had begun as an investigation into dubious practices had transformed into the discovery of an international network of financial manipulation that affected dozens of companies. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice firm, echoing through the auditorium. "What I'm going to present today goes far beyond a simple restructuring proposal." In the front rows, Olivia Evans smiled encouragingly. Beside her, Ethan played quietly with his toy cars, occasionally looking up to see his mother on the stage. Mrs. Johnson, seated nearby, maintained a proud look. For the next hour, Emily not only presented her program of ethical practices, but also revealed how several companies, including the Thompson Group itself, had been victims of an international manipulation scheme. The evidence was irrefutable, and the connections she established left the audience in shock. Most importantly, she continued, approaching the end, these discoveries give us a unique opportunity, a chance to not only correct past mistakes, but to establish a new paradigm in the American corporate world. Jack stood up, joining her on the stage. "That's why the Thompson Group is taking the first step," he announced. "We are not only implementing all the changes proposed by Ms. Davis, but also establishing an intercompany ethics committee, which will be led by her." The audience erupted in applause. In the front row, Ethan, even without fully understanding what was happening, began to clap enthusiastically, making everyone smile. After the presentation, while the guests gathered for a cocktail, Jack led Emily to the company's garden. It was a more modest space than the mansion's, but equally well maintained. "Remember when we met?" he asked, stopping near a fountain. "You were kneeling in the mansion's garden with Ethan on your back." Emily smiled at the memory. "It seems like it was in another life." "In a way it was," Jack replied, turning to face her. "Emily, these last few months have shown me what's really important in life. It's not power, it's not money, it's family." Paused, fumbling in his jacket pocket. Emily felt her heart race when he pulled out a small velvet box. "Mommy! Uncle Jack!" Ethan's voice sounded behind them. The boy came running, followed by Olivia and Mrs. Johnson, who were trying, without much success, to contain him. Jack smiled, bending down to pick Ethan up. "Actually, champ, you arrived just in time. How about helping me ask a very important question to Mommy?" Ethan's eyes sparkled with excitement when Jack whispered something in his ear. The boy immediately turned to Emily, blurting out the words, with the adorable lack of precision of a child his age. "Mommy, do you want to be our family forever?" Emily felt tears running down her face as Jack, still holding Ethan, knelt before her, opening the box that revealed a delicate diamond ring. "Emily Davis," he said, his voice choked with emotion, "would you do me the honor of making official what our hearts already know? Of turning this Uncle Jack into Daddy, of us being officially and forever a family." Ethan looked anxiously between the two, his little fingers playing with Jack's tie. Olivia and Mrs. Johnson, at a discreet distance, couldn't hold back their tears. "Yes," Emily replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes to everything." Ethan's smile lit up like the sun. "Now you're going to be my real daddy?" he asked Jack, who was already placing the ring on Emily's finger. "Yes, champ," Jack replied, hugging them both. "Now we're officially a family." At that moment, looking at the man who had changed her life and at the son who was her greatest gift, Emily understood that sometimes the greatest treasures arise from the most unexpected moments. That family isn't just a matter of blood, but of love, trust, and choice. The garden where it all began had been just the first chapter of a much larger story. A story of overcoming, of love, and of new beginnings. A story that proved that sometimes happy endings aren't just fairy tales. They're real, built day by day, with courage, honesty, and above all, love. Ethan, nestled between his parents, let out a laugh of pure happiness, echoing through the gardens of the Thompson Group. It was the sound of joy, of hope, of love. It was the sound of a family that had found its way back home,